Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Umir, who's a professional football scout and analyst. And we're here today to cover if Benjamin Sesko could be the next big thing up front. This is a very, very exciting player and one that I've been tracking for a good few years. And you kind of led the front on the Delat piece because you watched him for years and years, especially in the EDS and stuff, and he actually got an assist for Chelsea the other day. So, we're going to talk about Benjamin Sesko today, who's a player who I've been looking at almost since he moved to Leipzig and even way before that at Salzburg. And I don't know what it is, but I think for me, this is a player who I've always looked at and gone, there's no way you're not going to become a world-class striker. There's just no way. And I think Arsenal are being most concretely linked at the moment, at the time of recording, and it does look like he is their first choice for the number 9. And I want to talk about why I'm so fond of this deal and why, even though he's only got 13 league goals, why it's actually a lot better of a signing than people are realising. And we're going to do that straight away. So we can see here, I've got a graphic that shows Leipzig versus Arsenal's forwards in all competitions per 90 this season. So he has more goals than Havvertz per 90. He's got more goals than anyone else per 90. And that straight away, even though he's only got 13 goals, is a massive green flag for me. This is a young centre forward, and we'll get on to speaking a little bit more about his profile. But expected goals, he also ranks top of the bunch per 90. His big chance total is only topped by Kai Havvertz by just a little bit. And his total shots is actually the most barring Saka per 90. And I'm going to basically just throw this onto you to say, what do you think about Benjamin Sesko? What do you think are his strengths, his weaknesses? And if he is to make that jump to the Premier League, how do you actually see him translate into a team like Arsenal?
I think with a player of his quality, there's so much to like. I think, first of all, when you look at him, you look at his huge physical frame. Yeah. His physical qualities before anything else. And like you mentioned actually just before we started filming, he's used in an interesting way currently in the fact that he's told to drop deep and get involved in play. And for teams that play at the highest level with possession, I think that's always a good quality to have. I wouldn't have necessarily thought that would have been his game if I thought back to him a few years ago. But the fact that he's developed some of that means that he does slot into a higher possession side more naturally than, for example, somebody who only stays on the last line and attacks big spaces. With him being such a young player, with him being really tall as well, I think these are players who kind of grow into their frame and improve year on year. So the fact that he might not be the most refined player at the moment is completely fine to me, because I think with players, when I think of, for example, Isak, when I think of Ibrahimovic, these are all players who kind of, as they grew into their frame and understood how to utilize their body, became even better. So frame-wise, he's sort of this physical specimen, very agile, very tall, very fast. In terms of his actual qualities in and around the box, he can attack the big spaces, run in the channels. He's got this wicked ball striking ability. You've seen some of the shots,
it's like
30
FIFA,
yards,
like
40 yards out.
FIFA,
It doesn't look like it's a normal shot.
No.
So the fact that he does have that quality is something that's brilliant, I think, for top strikers. We've seen Kai Havvertz, and I think Kai Havvertz is actually an underrated player. He's really good at getting players involved, really good at sort of becoming this extra body, winning aerial duels. Counter-attacking he's generally quite good at. Link-up play he's good at as well. But ball striking ability is unreliable in my opinion.
Yes.
And having that reliable ball striking quality means that if you can get the ball to your player, you're more likely to score essentially. So with Arsenal, with teams in general, I think given the rise of man-to-man pressure, you're going to get more spaces to attack. In transition more vertically, if you've got a player who's brilliant at hitting the shot, attacking those spaces, and is very quick, and it gives you that transitional quality that Arsenal have lacked, for example. I think he's a fairly strong player to address some of their current weaknesses, even if he's not the most refined at present. I think he scales and he has the potential to be, one of the best in the world.
Do you know what I was actually just thinking then? Do you know when people say, like, I've mentioned this to you before, but I generally think that experience is quite overrated in football, and I don't really like it. And I think when people have been talking about Sesko being like not the finished product, and like Arsenal aren't the finished product, so like you can't really compare, I think sometimes that actually works.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can push each other on, and sometimes they can elevate each other, give each other's strengths and weaknesses and sort of balance each other out. And you don't have to be, completely refined to do that, and you don't have to be experienced.
Arsenal's a step up for him anyway.
Yeah, and this is a player with a lot of minutes under his belt. He's not exactly the young striker. And I've got a graphic in front of me that shows the last 2 seasons for Benjamin Sesko, so 23-24 and 24-25. We can see that he scored 39 goals, 0.66 goals per 90, which is a very good return. But most importantly, he's got 10 headers, 9 with his left foot and 20 with his right foot, showing that he's a very varied goal scorer. And we can actually see that there's 4 goals from outside the box, which if you'd look at him and you'd see this massive 6'5" lad who's basically being used as a pillar, he's not someone you'd imagine scoring these 40-yard screamers, but he is that type of player, and it's actually a very good quality that he has the sort of the distance from range. He's an X-factor player in terms of he doesn't really play how you'd think when you'd look at him in terms of size, and he does a lot of shots from distance. He's a bit more of a risk-taking centre forward. He plays a lot of his actions outside the box, but I think if he moves to a team like Arsenal, and I'll cover why in a second, he will play a lot more to his strengths rather than otherwise. So to kind of get on from what we're talking about here, we've got his open play touch map here, and as you can see, he has 9% and 7% just outside the box at the top of the D and 7% directly in the centre of the box. But he has a lot of dark red spots almost floating around the pitch, especially on this left side, and I wanted to show you why that is the case. So RB Leipzig, for the last couple of seasons, have played in this 4-2-2, and they have Lois Openda, who's basically playing as the striker next to him. And they are very much a traditional 2-man pairing, big lad up front, small lad up front, both very fast. But what Benjamin Sesko actually does quite a lot for Leipzig, which I didn't really expect to see, was a lot of dropping in. And his touch is actually relatively good, and he asked the question of, obviously, can a centre-half step out and can Openda spin in behind, and can he, access the space that Sesko is leaving? And he's actually relatively decent at doing this, and it's not really I wouldn't say it's one of his standout qualities, which is amazing, because he still looks really good there and really well refined. He's a very much an aerial threat. He's not one of them big men who don't know how to use the size. You can hit him with a ball, and he will have a very big chance at winning that. So when he's dropping in, it almost feels like he's playing sort of the left 8 positions where Havvertz plays under Arteta, and it's a bit complicated for me, and I don't really understand it. And I want to show you basically why that is a problem in terms of platforming Benjamin Sesko from RB Leipzig to another big team. So RB Leipzig in the Bundesliga are 14th for shots. Their passes long at 18th bottom of the league. This is a 6'5" striker who Arteta is licking his lips at to launch balls from David Raya. They play the least long balls in the entire Bundesliga. Crosses into the box, least in the entire Bundesliga. Crosses overall, 16th in the Bundesliga. Shot creating actions from dead balls, so we're talking about set pieces, throw-ins, blah, 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 16th.
And you'd think, when you look at his goal scored, for example, his goal scored suddenly seem brilliant when you're not utilising some of his physical qualities and his ball striking ability.
Yeah. And I just think, I was watching him, and I did a lot of extensive research on Sesko, but I was also looking sort of outside the scope, not just watching him as a player, what kind of environment and setting is he in. And then I found out that he was playing almost this up and down role at number 9. I was like, well, that's not right. And then I was watching Leipzig in open play, and I was seeing a lot of counter-attacking opportunities, which is really good because he has this brilliant movement in the centre of the pitch where he almost drifts and then just scoops in behind like that. And it off the shoulder, he's electric. He's electric. His first step is so fast, and he can just brush past defenders. He's absolutely brilliant. So in terms of what Leipzig are doing, in terms of how they're not hindering him because it's a team sport, and I understand you don't have to play exactly to one player's strengths.
But they're not maximising his global quality, I suppose.
If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. I've now got Arsenal's sort of metrics in them. So crosses into the box, Arsenal are 8th, crosses overall, they're 3rd, shots 5th, goal creating actions from dead balls 1st, shot creating actions from dead balls 2nd. So we're talking about sort of this physical powerhouse, elevating him to a team that plays more in theory to the things that he does well. And do you kind of understand that argument? Do you think that that's a very viable, because when I'm looking, I'm trying to convince people that this is one of the best striker opportunities in the market for me.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it, but people are going, he's got 13 goals. And I'm going, yeah, he's got 13 goals, but the team he plays for are almost playing against his quality.
Yeah.
And whilst they do have counter-attacking moments, which is where I think he excels quite a lot, they're not crossing the ball into a 6'5" lad. They're not good at set pieces. They're not going long.
I know. I completely agree. I think whenever I've scouted players or in my analysis, I always look at the environment and see if there's anything that you can replicate in one player in a particular environment, moving to somewhere else. In this case, it's actually a little bit different because the environment isn't necessarily at all very similar to what we might expect of an Arsenal. But even within that, we've seen situations where he's been impressive aerially, or we've seen situations in which he's had a very good pure ball striking quality. And because we've seen these individual situations, I think it's sensible to extrapolate that those qualities would look better in a team that can get him in those situations more often. I don't think that's outlandish.
You think it's relatively straightforward?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think if you look at sort of the situations where he's looked best in for the team that he currently plays for, is there another team that he could get those situations in more often? And I think Arsenal is certainly one of those teams, because we mentioned his frame, we mentioned his ability in the box, we mentioned his ability to run into these channels. I don't think you necessarily need to do that from all the way down here. I think you can sort of almost do it in like a baiting the press and then attacking big spaces fashion. Secondarily, on one counterpoint, or not necessarily a counterpoint, but one thing I'll give Sesko props for is, despite doing this role, he has refined his game.
Yes, he has. Yeah.
In my head, I'm trying to think of the rationale for playing in that manner or utilising him in that manner. I think of Ekatike, for example, who also plays in that sort of drop deep fashion and carrying it, and he's in a similar way very tall and a quite wiry player, and also quite quick. But I think that sort of frame lends itself to, one, resisting pressure. It's harder to trap the ball, and I think these players will look better in a few years once they do kind of understand how
the body works.
Yeah, their body works and how the ball comes into their feet, for example. But Sesko's decent at that, and because they are so tall, they are so quick, the ability to carry the ball, they're very good at it over big spaces. So I think that's why they're used in that fashion. And I think if he were to go to Arsenal, they would still try and perhaps use him in that fashion. Find him from the keeper, for example, have Kai Havvertz as the other option, and almost in that dual fashion, they can both do both things. But obviously, one's a little bit quicker, one's a little bit better at scoring, I would say. The other one's a bit better at pure hold-up and build-up play, but they can kind of play in that dual fashion. But the fact that he can do that a little bit,
it's like another string to the bow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Haaland has shown that a little bit over the last year and a half at Manchester City. But if you were to sign a player who already has some of those foundations, plus you can put him in situations where he's more comfortable in naturally, I think you should expect him to improve.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's a perfect number 9, and I'm not saying you're saying that.
No.
But I'm not saying he's a perfect number 9. But when I look at sort of the platform he's at right now, and I'm looking at the teams that are room, and I'm looking at him elevating, I think he's got a lot of stuff to work on. I think his box movement for his size and his power could be a little bit more, crisp and clean. He should be making himself absolutely unstoppable in the box.
Yeah.
And I think when he drops deep, he does. If there's pressure if he's pressure on his back, he does fall over a little bit. He's a little bit clumsy on the ball. Sometimes when he drops deep, it's actually the pass that lets him down. He likes to overplay quite a lot of flicks, a lot of sort of wayward passes, and that's where I'm looking and I'm like, he's trying stuff, but he shouldn't be there doing that. Yeah. And I know Arsenal ask a lot of the striker, but I think his touch is very, very strong for a man of his size. But it's the 5 touches after where it's, getting and wriggling out and then giving the ball. And that's where I don't think he works amazingly well. But as an out ball, as a pillar in the box, as a channel runner, as someone who can spin it between centre halves, I think he's one of the few strikers I've watched where if he plays right in the middle of 2 central defenders, he's such a nuisance for both players. And it's like, doesn't matter what side the ball is on. he's just off the shoulder on every single turn. And
Does he have a particular zone that he favours?
For me, he spins more on his right foot, and I think he does tend to enjoy sort of the low driven across the face of the goalkeeper.
From about here, do you think?
Yeah. And he does spin more off the left-sided defender, I would say. But I do see him favouring more, and he does attack like he's such an arrow. He's such an arrow. He's like, he goes right for the heart of it. I think, to be honest, when he's got too much time 1v1, I don't think he actually he's not like a dead certain finisher. I was watching, when you watch Haaland and he goes through, it's in. You know it's in. And I think he's still yet to develop sort of, if he has 6 or 7 touches leading up to the goal mouth, he can't, make it.
Kind of.
But in terms of instinctive finishes, in terms of off the cuff finishes, headers in the air, both feet, I think he's got a really good skill set. And I think he's a relatively, not going to say perfect. He's a brilliant project centre forward. And
one question I was going to ask you actually before we do wrap this up is, for teams who want to take that next step, because obviously we're talking of him as, this really strong centre forward who's got so many facets to his game, and he has the potential to be even better, but he is still really good at the moment. How does that sort of profile of player fit into teams
chasing the big one,
or teams at the highest level, for example, especially in such a pivotal position?
That's where I see, because I'm like, translating from the Bundesliga to the Premier League is like, people get a bit concerned about that. Would he get concerned about that? How many games would he be trusted to lead the line? If he misses a chance, like in a game that's 0-0 and you get 1 point instead of 3, Arsenal, they're kicking themselves. They've got to go for the big one next season. And what would you say about that? I've got one more thing before we wrap up. But what would you say about that aspect in terms of, he does have a very humble personality. He's an absolute monster. Like,
I think personality-wise, he probably is okay. I think, for example, to Marmoush and how he's playing off of Haaland. And he's still getting those similar situations. And I think Arteta appreciates the fact that you would need to get players into those situations, whoever it is, whether it's Arteta, whether or not he stays, whether or not he makes a big move at another point in his career. Whoever utilises him, if they do appreciate his skill set, I think he'll be fine. But my question is that enough right now for the highest, caliber of team? I think if you've got a strong team around him, perhaps, and if you've got other players who can kind of help him, share some of that burden. In a way, Kai Havertz is probably that player. So I think it's probably okay. But I think Arsenal have so many of these players who are
nearly there.
They've got a great foundation, and you can sign project players who will be there in a few years, or you can sign that ready player. But I don't think it makes sense for Arsenal now to spend money on second best in class or good. They need to go for very good or very, almost the very best. And I think some people would think Sesko is that, so that's fine. But
I'm not a million miles away from saying that. I'm looking at the market in terms of who's the best in class available. A lot of the strikers who are getting about in the market at the moment are guys who maybe come off just one season, and he's done it for a couple of seasons now, and that leans me more towards saying him. But I do understand exactly what you're saying, especially at a team like Arsenal where the pressure's on right from the get-go next season.
I feel like there's not those like sort of Luis Suarez, Aguero.
No, there's not like a role
that
centre
kind
forward.
of like those 26 to 30-year-old high-level number 9s.
Well, there is, but they either want ludicrous money or just don't fancy it.
And there's very few of them as well. So I think Sesko probably makes sense, but that's obviously the worry generally.
And just before we wrap up, just to go off basically what I was talking about before about platforming him at a higher level, I want to show you some of the stats that I've actually got between him and Kai Havertz. I know Kai Havertz has played a little bit deeper sometimes, so some of the stats will be a little bit patchy.
So is Sesko though.
So is Sesko, to be fair. It's not a bad shout. Touches in the penalty area, Kai Havertz has got 5.4 to Sesko's 3.5, showing that obviously a team with more superiority up the pitch gets you more touches in the box, almost double, by the way. His touches overall, 38 for Havvertz and 33 for Sesko. Progressive passes received, which is obviously 10-metre plus passes where they're both receiving. Kai Havertz 5.8, Sesko 4.9. Average shot distance, Kai Havertz is 11.3. Benjamin Sesko is 17.3. Showing that he's taking shots from way out, which is, again, some of the shot selection issues that maybe he does have at a young age. But then you see him produce worldies and you're like, well, I don't really want to take that away from you, but maybe a bit of refinement there. Take on success. Kai Havvertz is 26%, Sesko is 52%. Which
is why I think they're using him deeper for his carrying quality.
He's actually got really good ball manipulation. His touch is really good. And when he gets up to speed, it doesn't really matter how good you are at carrying the ball if you just kick it and run. He's a
I don't think it's necessarily small space take-ons. That sometimes you think of a Doku, for example. But I do think with that frame, that power, that ability to receive, turn and drive, you're getting those numbers up, aren't you?
And one of the biggest things we spoke about in terms of improving Arsenal is the extra transition quality,
100%.
The extra big space quality, someone who doesn't slow it down, someone who speeds it up. He's got that. And then finally, touches in the final third. Kai Havvertz is on 20.1, Benjamin Sesko's on 12.3. So if we're talking about replicating numbers and getting more touches in more impactful areas on the pitch, if Arsenal platform him in a similar way that they have with Kai Havvertz, getting him them amount of touches and the volume of touches in the right area, for me, I can only see a player of Benjamin Sesko's quality getting better, and especially if he moves to Arsenal. He's been injury-free, touch wood, since 21-22. He's been injury-free, not one injury at all. So for me, it just looks like a very upward trending trajectory. And I'm really, really excited to see where he goes next. I think he's one of the best striker prospects in the market. And I think people have known that for quite a while. He's always been a player who, people look and go, look at the size of him, look at the pace, and naturally you're more drawn towards him. And I think he's been one of them wonder kids, a bit similar to Havvertz, where you are keeping up with them ever so slightly. You do sort of watch where they move in the career and the goals they've scored. And anything else you would like to say?
Not particularly. I think he's a brilliant footballer, and it's probably the right time for him to take a step up. Whether that's Arsenal or someone else, I don't know. But I would love to see him at Arsenal. I would love to see him in the Premier League.
I would love to see him at United. Honestly, I would love to see him at Man United. In terms of what we're doing right now.
Just he's just a bit of everything you need.
Honestly,
even all this sort of
all that stuff. Decent touch, bring Cunha in,
good shot,
wing backs crossing it in, Ahmad in swingers, bit of transition, bit of low block. I'd love to see him at United. Honestly, I really would. But it doesn't appear at the current time of recording that Manchester United are interested in
and Mr. Sesko, I would advise strongly against it. So. But brilliant player. We'll see where he ends up. I think he's one who will have a good career, whether or not he makes that step up now or in a few years. But he's certainly one of the top young prospects in the world, isn't he?
There's something about strikers from certain nations. I'm more drawn to them. I just love when they're from a bit of an obscure nation. They don't produce top quality players.
But that's sort of talisman.
He's oh my god, he's like a god to them.
Well, I always think Timo Pukki. That was my guy. I thought he was brilliant. So.
Right, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel. And we'll be back next week for some more analysis.